It died. I am Colton Stansifer, detective, nostalgia fan, and explore everything at large. I must figure out what is it that's kept the 1980s nostalgia so relevant. It seems like most decades, the nostalgia of the decade becomes popular 2 decades later, and then 3 decades later, that nostalgia popularity dies down. But the 1980s nostalgia became big in the 2000s. They remain just as strong in the 2010s. It looks like it's still strong in the 2020s. 80s nostalgia has not died down. Yeah, I really like it, but what is it that keeps 1980s nostalgia big and popular and profitable? I mean, it really says something. Back in the 2010s, we barely got any television shows about that taking place in the 1990s, but we still got a few sitcoms taking place in the 1980s, like the Goldbergs. It's really something. So the mystery. Who shall I ask? Who has the answers? Could be, see, 1980s, was around in the 1980s, became popular in the 2000s, still popular 2020, I think. Is it that the 1980s was better, more popular than the nostalgia of the 1970s and 1960s and so on before that? That it isn't better than the 1990s nostalgia? Do we have the best video games of the 1980s? See, we had Super Mario Brothers, Super Mario Bros. 2, Super Mario Bros. 3, Legend of Zelda, Paperboy. See, what games came out after the 80s? See, there's Sonic the Hedgehog, Sonic the Hedgehog 2, Sonic the Hedgehog 3, Fortnite, Call of Duty, Resident Evil. Yeah, I guess that checks out. The television of the 80s, see, like there was cable, but a lot of people didn't know about cable. See, Nickelodeon, you'd have Rugrats, or Ren and Stimpy, or a lot of the good stuff, and the Disney Channel was a pay channel, and really nobody paid for HBO or pay-per-view or whatever. Yeah, it checks out. The music of the 80s, we had Hall & Oates, and Blondie, and Weird Al Yankovic, and Michael Jackson, and Prince, and Tiffany, and Stevie Gibson. From the 90s, we had Nirvana, and Green Day, and TLC, and more Weird Al Yankovic, and maybe some Madonna. Yeah, it checks out. Then, like 2000s, we had music of Avril Lavigne and Kelly Clarkson and What's His Name and What's Her Name. In the 2000s, we had crappy performers like Justin Bieber and Lady Gaga, and great performers like Katy Perry and What's His Name. Checks out. It's fine. A mystery. Maybe I'm gonna find a significant right in. Rope, can you weigh in? What? Why is the 80s nostalgia still as popular as it's always been? This mystery may be inconclusive. All this time later, I still do not know what keeps the 80s so popular. Is it because the 80s has a lot of money, or 80s was a bully? Be the politics. See, in the 80s we had Ronald Reagan and George Bush. In the 90s we had a little more Bush, but we also had Clinton. In the 2000s we had another Bush, and then Obama. And the 2000s we had Donald Trump, who was popular in the 80s, but not as a president. Checks out. What about the good movies of the 80s? See, we had Back to the Future trilogy, even though the last one technically came in 1990, and we had Porky's and the good National Lampoon's Vacation movies, and so we had Zapped with Cabello and Caddyshack. From the 90s, we had Dennis the Menace and The Cable Guy and Waterworld. Then the 2000s, we had Eurotrip and Passing of the Christ and Mona Lisa Smiles and Spy Kids. And then the 2010s, we had 2010s. Is that when we had that album? We got the Return of the Chipmunks, and we had those Smurfs movies, and some Bad Dr. Seuss movies. In the 2000s, we've had Birds of Prey and Onward. Yeah, it checks out. Well, think it's obvious why 80s nostalgia continued, because the other nostalgia sucks. In conclusion, I have found that there will probably not be an actual answer. Unfortunately, the world may never know why the 80s nostalgia is still as popular as it's always been. We will ask the psychic Goofy, will he know? I am Goofy. You are Colton Stansifer. You want to know why is the 1980s nostalgia still as popular as it's always been? Well, the 1980s had something that the 1990s and 2000s have not had. However, in the 2010s, people are so nostalgic for the 80s that 1980s also became relevant again. So the 80s is basically now, and now is the 1980s. Then when the 2010s nostalgia becomes popular, the 80s nostalgia will still be popular, and the 1980s and the 2000s will take over the world. That'll be $130. But if you want to stop, if you want me to use my powers to stop the 80s and teens from taking over the world with domination, dictatorship, that'd be $3,000 in cash, in ones. I am Goofy.